welcome to Video World, with a slightly different look to it this time, but the content just as entertaining as ever. Our play is a comedy thriller called The Accountant. Not normally a fascinating profession, perhaps, by reputation, but in this case, the client happens to be the mafia. Blackadder is back again, and sport in this issue features rugby matches between Scotland and Fiji and Wales against the All Blacks. We'll also be showing you what happened when David Bryant met David Corkill in the final of the UK Indoor Bowls Championship. The big political story, of course, has been the Chancellor Nigel Lawson's resignation and disarray among the Tories. The programme Open Air stumbled on a scoop when it set out to do a day in the life of newsreader Michael Burke. The day, it turned out, was one of the most dramatic in the newsroom for months.
At this stage, anyway, it's a very quiet day, and those are the most disappointing ones, really. I mean, any journalist wants a big story. It's not just sort of disasters and so on, but a kind of feeling that something of moment is happening, something that is going to pin the world back by the ears. It's really important news. It'll get people listening to the news and thinking, gosh, something, getting people on the edge of their seats because something really important is happening. That's the sort of thing that gives a journalist adrenaline, but at this stage it hasn't happened.
Press Association, Chancellor Nigel Lawson has resigned.
We've got to go Norman Shaw. We've got a crew at the house, and we're getting Sergeant into the studio for 5 minutes' time.
Yeah. John Cole's been found, so John Cole does not need to be phoned.
OK then, well thank you very much for your help. Fine.
We'll try and rustle up Daniel Jeffries as fast as you can. Crew in his house and a crew outside the Treasury. Tim!
Right. OK, is there somebody else?
They're sending somebody. All right, OK, look, I'll soldier through anyway. We'll have a separate meeting we can take afterwards.
Could you phone him and do that?
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Andrew Harvey and Moira Stewart.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. The Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, has resigned. The shock announcement came a short time after the Prime Minister had defended him in the Commons. She said, advisers advise and ministers decide.
Right. OK. The strategy is we're going to build up blocks, which ought to be sufficiently simple that we can run them, even though some packages in an ideal world would be conflated. But the plan is we will assign producers to individual building blocks, and we'll see as we go whether they can be conflated. Building block 1, the basic news event, which Adrian Van Claveren should do with John Sargent. I think tactically my initial impulse is that Sargent is going to have to stay down there.
It's been reported at Westminster within the last 5 minutes that the Chancellor Nigel Lawson has resigned.
It's clearly tonight, wherever Lawson is, whatever shots we can get of Lawson tonight, if we have to begin with a zoom in to an empty building, that's where we go. We then go back through the quarter-inch exchange in the House of Commons, in which Thatcher seemingly backed with this new formula both Walters and Lawson, and then crucially we soak up as much of the front page reaction as we can.
Well, I'm joined from Westminster by the Leader of the Opposition, Neil Kinnock. Mr Kinnock, your reaction, are you pleased?
It isn't a question of pleasure.
As much as you give me on Walters, there will have to be a graphic. We're very, very short of Walters shots, we know that. You can use the 1981 library shots. You simply say he came in as an economic advisor in 1980, all right? Separate building block.
The fuss is over Sir Alan Walters, the Prime Minister's economic advisor, silent.
Then there's a Lawson profile, which actually may precede this in the running order, which Julian Rush. Where is he?
No, sorry. Sergeant is doing a package for 9.
Is he? OK.
And then once he's finished that, we'll be able to go to one of the live cameras. But I want somebody on the end of another live camera in Downing Street, in case anything's happening there, live at 9 o'clock.
You will want to be remembered as the Chancellor who cut taxes.
Right, the following are the people that we need to trace. We must make certain that the bid is in for the Treasury, Lawson. Any other Treasury Minister. We will phone Downing Street and see who Downing Street, if anybody, is prepared to put up for the government. They probably won't put up Thatcher, they may put up somebody else, a loyalist. All right, and I will assign 2 people to this.
Phone up the Financial Times and see where Samuel Britton is. And if he's available, bring him in.
News organiser, a news flash from PA, John Major has been appointed the new Chancellor.
That's hysterical.
Hello, is Gus O'Donnell there, please? Hello, it's BBC Television 9 o'clock news, Adrian Van Claveren. A series of requests. First of all, where is Mr. Lawson at the moment? Are you able to say that? Right. Is there any possibility of an interview with him for tonight's 9 o'clock news?
Wait a minute, the common statement.
Of Nigel Lawson as Chancellor. From everyone at the 6 o'clock news, good night. 4 minutes to 6, someone said the Chancellor's resigned. And I thought, this is a joke. This is some kind of wind-up. but it wasn't, and from then on, just everything happened.
Home Secretary is now David Waddington.
We get Kinnock.
It's N1, OK. Newsflash in N1. N1, where's Andrew? OK. Yeah, but he's Douglas Hurd. His place at? Do we have a new Home Secretary?
Yes, David
Okay.
Waddington.
Yeah, his place at the Home Office.
Hang on.
Right. Yeah, he's gone to IP.
There's no longer currently, is he? Who was currently?
Yeah, and then the announcement follows the dramatic news earlier this evening that
And don't forget, Walters has also resigned. We haven't put that on the air,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah, I've spoken to space. 25 seconds. And then I'll say more at 9.
New Home Secretary is David Waddington, the present government chief whip.
We haven't told them who the new Foreign Secretary is.
Yeah, they do that.
The new...
Yes, it is. Douglas Hurd.
Line 2.
Line 2.
That's not for you, Adrian, you know that.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a brief statement to the House. As the House will be aware, my right honourable friend, the member for Blaby, has resigned as Chancellor of the Exchequer. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, learnt of his intention to resign just before 2:30.
Yes, Whitelaw won't, and prior we've had a message won't, though we haven't actually spoke to him directly, but I'll try him.
Thank you.
It says insert, but there isn't an insert in the top slug. It says insert on the screen, but there's no insert in the slug.
In private, senior Tories were convinced that...
Mark, Baker has said yes.
I've only read one
Well.
paragraph of the agency.
Okay.
About 30 seconds. Everyone settle down, please.
15, swear, 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
And
0.
The Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, resigned tonight, taking the government, Westminster and financial markets around the world totally by surprise.
Run titles.
Good evening. The Chancellor, Nigel Lawson... This really was unexpected. I mean, totally unexpected. It's a complete shock on a very, very dull news day. So it does tend to sort of knock you sideways a bit. That's the first thing. Then there's the sort of every journalist feeling of excitement over a big story. And I think the danger is actually getting swept up in it too much. A lot of these big things with many different aspects to them. The difficulty, I think, is a producer's difficulty as much as anything else in kind of dividing it all up so that, you know, everybody knows what they're doing and which bits, so you cover everything. You know, there's an awful danger that everybody gets terribly excited and runs around as if they're chickens with their heads cut. That is the 9 o'clock news tonight. Good night.
Brilliant.
Very good. Good. It worked quite well, didn't it?
Yeah. 42 minutes, 45 seconds. I think it's the longest 9 it's ever been.
There's a record.
I think broadly I've only got one thing to say, which is thank you very, very much. I think in the circumstances that was really extremely, extremely good. I've never seen so many people work so hard so fast. It was a very quiet day until 6 and we didn't have a lead item. That's a perfectly true story. We didn't have a lead. When news like this breaks out, there are two impulses. First is, can the earth open up so that I can be swallowed in case it all goes frightfully wrong? Which is an honest reaction, but you have to dismiss within the first microsecond. And the second reaction is instantly to mobilize the key resources. It's not true, I think, to say that I kept a cool head or that we all kept a cool head. There needs to be a degree of, if not panic, but controlled anxiety. I think, to be honest, the overwhelming emotion that you've got at the end is one of relief that you haven't done something so cardinally awful that you've sort of disgraced the programme and yourself and the BBC.
Do it all again tomorrow.
And Mrs Thatcher's political crisis has continued with challenges to her attitude to Europe and concern about her style of leadership. Peter Snow examined her situation for Newsnight.
The Labour lead in the 3 voting intention polls done since the crisis is 6% according to NOP, 7% according to Mori, 13% according to Harris. NOP and Mori talked to people on Saturday. Harris polled people on Sunday as well. In the last general election, the Conservatives had an 11% lead over Labour. When NOP asked people whether they were satisfied with Mrs Thatcher as Prime Minister, 24% said yes. 62% said they were not satisfied. And that 24% is the lowest rating any Prime Minister has had since polling began half a century ago. Incidentally, the 62% who are dissatisfied include nearly a third of Conservative supporters. When Harris asked people about their confidence in Mrs Thatcher's handling of her ministers and her government, only 12% said they had a great deal of confidence, 19% said they had quite a lot. The other two-thirds took a negative view. 37% said they had not very much confidence, 30% said they had none at all. More than half the people who gave a response thought Mrs Thatcher should resign now.
The polls are very bad, but they're no worse than they were in the autumn of 1981, when Mrs Thatcher was the most unpopular Prime Minister since, I think, Neville Chamberlain. They got pretty bad for her in the depths of the Westland affair. I think the difference this time is that on both those previous occasions, she was at the bottom of an economic cycle with the hope that things would get better. This time, she's unpopular at the top of an economic cycle with the expectation that things are going to get worse and may not get better again in time for a general election.
The most disturbing aspect of the crisis, as Whitehall and the city prepare for the fifth day of uncertainty since Nigel Lawson resigned, is the way leading members of the Conservative Party won't bury their differences. Sir Geoffrey Howe did it on Saturday evening with a speech he cleared only with the Foreign Secretary and the Chancellor. He sent Mrs Thatcher a copy, but didn't clear it with her. And on Sunday he told the BBC the changes that had taken place had not provoked wild applause around the world. And today, a surprise from Norman Tebbit. In the London Evening Standard interview, the former party chairman, who'd expressed unqualified support for Mrs Thatcher on Newsnight last Thursday, said today it was an appalling political muddle, and said it was dangerous for a captain to appear semi-detached from her team. A worry echoed by another powerful voice today.
I think all backbenchers on the Conservative side would like to be clear about what our policy is, and what we seek is that all ministers should say the same thing from the Prime Minister downwards and accept collective cabinet responsibility for all their statements.
European policy is the obvious immediate area in which any differences within the government risk perpetuating the crisis. Today, Norman Fowler, the Employment Secretary, was firmly rebuffing the proposed social charter at a meeting of ministers in Brussels. He told Britain's partners that Mrs Thatcher would not sign the charter that ran counter to its entire economic strategy when she sits down at the Strasbourg summit in 5 weeks' time. But if the social charter is dividing her from Europe, what to do with the pound is dividing her from her own ministers. Here's Sir Geoffrey Howe on Saturday about Britain's readiness to enter the exchange rate mechanism. It is, he said, of the highest importance that Her Majesty's government is seen to remain committed to that position clearly and in good faith. And here's Mrs Thatcher on the ERM, recorded the same day. You just simply can't have a system with a currency like sterling playing under that higgledy-piggledy set of rules. Some believe she's even upping Britain's price for entry to the ERM.
The Prime Minister yesterday, it seemed to me, went out of her way quite deliberately to erect new obstacles to Britain's becoming a member of it. It's almost as if she's trying to create, almost deliberately trying to create a minefield which is almost uncrossable.
All now depends on how Mrs Thatcher's new lineup at the top plays this central issue. Will Sir Geoffrey Howe and his ally on this issue, Douglas Hurd, the new Foreign Secretary, be joined by the new Chancellor, John Major? And what motive will they have to force the pace in the critical 5 weeks that lead up to the Strasbourg summit?
Unless a major effort is made to force the Prime Minister, or persuade her, or whatever verb one likes to use, to persuade her that now is the time when we should be joining the EMS, or at the latest after July next year, when France and Italy have removed their exchange controls, that unless that attempt is made and it succeeds, then I think Britain will become increasingly vulnerable and increasingly isolated, and I think that's bad.
November is traditionally the month when most of Europe remembers the dead of 2 world wars. But in Britain this year, the celebrations have been marred by protests from peace campaigners that Poppy Day has become too divisive and nationalistic. Rupert Seagar reports.
10 million died in World War I. Later, 55 million were to give up their lives in World War II. The courage, the grief, the pity and the shame of these and other almost countless wars this century are recalled on Remembrance Day each year. In a small factory less than a mile from the Veterans' Home, the British Legion makes the millions of poppies it sells every year. The dyed paper petals and plastic stem, a modern-day token harkening back to the flowers that grew on the fields of Flanders in the Great War. Their colour represents the blood of the fallen. The white poppy is a symbol of peace. Last year, 35,000 were sold. The British pacifist movement, the Peace Pledge Union, has deliberately set itself up in competition against the British Legion. The red poppy and the traditional Remembrance Day service, they say, glorifies war.
There's a lot of militarist trappings surrounding it. I mean, there are soldiers leading a lot of the parades. There are the old veterans with their medals, school children as cadet forces. And it's the whole military ethos that we find objectionable because it's something which seems to justify war rather than question it.
This, one of a number of posters going up around the country depicting a fictional Nazi invasion, has further fuelled the war of the poppies. The pacifists object on moral grounds.
The notion of having stormtroopers marching across Westminster Bridge is really pretty awful. I mean, we're friends with Germany. And how do Germans who come to Britain feel about it? That shows very clearly to us the kind of mindset that the British Legion is in.
For many people, the relics of war are fascinating. The Imperial War Museum in London has attracted crowds daily since it opened in 1917. There's no Rambo-style image here. The museum deals in the tragic reality of war and its consequences. And here they believe Remembrance Day must be inextricably military in nature, and rightly so.
I think the way in which we commemorate the dead is appropriate because, after all, if you didn't have soldiers, you wouldn't have wars. You've got to have soldiers to fight wars, and if you take the First World War, the number of civilian casualties was comparatively small. Of course, it's very high in the Second World War. So soldiers fight wars, and it's therefore, I think, appropriate that soldiers should play a leading part in commemorating their comrades who fell in wars.
Every year on the eve of Remembrance Day, old soldiers march on the Albert Hall, coming together to share their experiences, remembering their brothers and sisters in arms who died for their country.
I don't see why we shouldn't remember our dead, whatever form that may take. I don't see Remembrance Day, as I understand it, the wearing of this poppy, as I understand it, in any way glorifying war. It might be glorifying the price of peace, if one is being clever and semantics. It's certainly not glorifying war.
That's not the view of the Methodist minister, Lord Soper, who was an outspoken pacifist during the Second World War.
We must remember that war corrupts and spoils almost every human activity, and that there is very little except individual courage and self-sacrifice to commend it, in fact nothing to commend it. And until we can remember that out of the First World War came the Second World War, and out of the Second World War has come the preparation for a nuclear war, it's in that light that I believe we ought to alert the memories of the past to say something to the children of the future.
As generation succeeds generation and the memory of war fades, it's likely that the role of Remembrance Day will continue to be questioned.
Now for our drama.